Welcome to the More Than Anxiety podcast. I'm Megan DeVito, and I help ambitious women break out of the anxiety cycle that keeps them frustrated and stuck. Get ready for a lighthearted approach that will change what you think, how you feel, and what you believe about yourself. This podcast is full of simple steps, a lot of truth talk, and inspiration to take action so you walk away feeling confident, calm, and ready to live. Let's get to it. Hey there. Welcome to episode 109 of the More Than Anxiety podcast. My name is Megan. I am thrilled to have you here with me today to meet Michelle May. Michelle is a psychotherapist, an author, a trainer, a supervisor, a speaker. She is the head of the intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy program at New Washington School of Psychiatry out in Washington, D.C., and she's a dynamic therapist. What she does is she provides psychotherapy to adult individuals and couples at her private practice out in Virginia. She also offers trainings to health practices, universities, and organizations, as well as individual and group consultative supervision. She's the author of an upcoming book that is coming out on the date that this episode drops, October 8th, 2024. And the book is called What I Couldn't Tell My Therapist: The Truths We Told to Heal Our Lives. She is amazing. She offers so much hope. We talk about labels, we talk about defense mechanisms, and how we keep ourselves safe by not getting to the root of the problem, and how when you're willing to go there, when you're willing to get to the root of the problem, you can heal and you can peel that label off your shirt and get on with your life and have amazing things happen for you. I love this episode. She has an open invitation to come back anytime that she wants. So I think you're going to really love it too. Enjoy. Everybody, thank you for listening today. I want to go ahead and get started and just let Michelle introduce herself to you so that you can know more about her and why I'm so excited to have her on this week's episode.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle M May. I'm a licensed professional counselor or psychotherapist with a private practice for adults and couples right outside of Washington, D.C. in Arlington, Virginia. I also teach and chair at the Washington School of Psychiatry in the intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy program, which is quite a mouthful. I often just refer to it as intensive dynamic therapy, but that is my specialty, and I do it with individuals and couples, and I'm also a soon-to-be author.
This is so exciting. This is so exciting. So how did you end up teaching in this place? And what is your background? What brought you here?
So I went to graduate school here, and for those that are listening who have an LPC or even an LCSW, know that where you go to graduate school and start getting your hours is usually where you want to plant yourself because of all the regulations and accumulation of hours. So thankfully, I also love where I am in Arlington, Virginia, but I got into my specialty after my last semester of graduate school. I had a professor that specialized in this weird type of therapy called intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy. And I remember thinking, why is it called that? That's so long. That's such a mouthful. But as soon as he described it to us, and he even showed us some of his work on videotape, I was sold. I was like, this is what I've been looking for. I went through all of graduate school without finding really what resonated with me. And then when I found ISTDP or intensive dynamic therapy, I knew I had found my clinical home. So then in order to, most specialties require postgraduate training. And so the Washington School of Psychiatry was local to me and offered a 3-year postgraduate training in ISTDP. And so it requires a lot more training than, normally we're used to 3-day trainings in this, or a week or 2 weeks, but this is at least a 3-year extra commitment for good reason. And then after I graduated from the 3-year program, they asked if I would come back to teach, which I did. And now I wound up as chair as well. I absolutely love it.
Amazing. Amazing. So what is different about this type of therapy versus, I had someone on just a few weeks ago who talked about EMDR. We've talked about narrative therapy. I love hearing all the different ways that therapists help people. So what's different about this type of therapy?
Yeah, it's so cool that we do have all of these different ways, right? CBT,
Yeah.
DBT, EMDR, blah, 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 narrative therapy, all these things.
Yeah.
ISTDP is really this way to work with someone that trains you to track moment to moment to moment what's going on within the patient and what might be best for them. So I actually might have a
Mm.
session that looks a lot more like CBT, or I might have a session that looks a lot more like DBT or narrative therapy. So it's in our program, we're really taught to psychodiagnose each and every moment to see what is actually best right here. What am I seeing? And it also is all about really cracking into the unconscious. And in order to do
Mm.
so, we have to be very well versed in seeing barriers that people put up in front of you. So we're like defense mechanism experts and reading
Ooh.
unconscious anxiety experts. And we actually videotape our work too. It's part of the training because we are you are monitoring every moment. A sigh is a big indication of something, a shift in this and that. And so it's very an intricate way of working and a very powerful way of working, but also brings in other methods of therapy.
Wow. Okay, so I have to admit, I gave you all these questions, and all of a sudden my brain's like, ooh, okay, now I have a
Anywhere you
million
want to
more
go, anywhere
questions.
you want to go is fine with me.
Because I'm
Anywhere.
like, okay, so now we're
Yeah.
getting into the sneaky things that I think so many people don't realize, that we do have all these behaviors, and that when you notice the sigh, when you notice maybe they pause or they get defensive, which I am so guilty of so many times. I'm like, oh, hey. But when we have those behaviors, just picking them out in the moment, how is that helpful? Because I mean, I have a guess, but I wonder what your answer is.
Sure. So, for example, let's say I have a client that comes in and they're like, I've been really depressed ever since I started law school. It's especially this one. I'm just making this up. This isn't a real
Yeah,
person.
go ahead.
I've really had this really hard time with this professor who I think hates me, blah, blah, blah. Now, one really important element of therapy is always tracking that we're working on a problem that the client is creating for themselves, even if they don't realize it, right?
Right.
So then we would say to this client, well, what is happening inside of you that you would like my help with? And so maybe this client says, well, I tend to kind of think a lot of people don't like me and ruminate about it.
Mm.
So I'm already understanding that this client ruminates, right? That's one of their defense mechanisms. And maybe what I've witnessed in her so far is that she keeps doing this with her hands. She keeps clenching her hands, squeezing her hands together as she's talking. Now, this is
Mm.
a certain type of anxiety that has a lot of different names, but I'll keep it simple for now, called voluntary muscle anxiety, which
Oh.
means she has the optimal level of anxiety in this moment to approach what she normally avoids.
Ooh.
So the same thing goes with a sigh. A sigh is also an indication that there's tension around the intercostal muscles of our like lungs
Huh?
and thoracic region, and is like a good indication that anxiety is being discharged through the optimal channels. But let's say all of a sudden I asked her, so what exactly happened in this law school class with this professor? And then all of a sudden I noticed her like flop her arm down to the sofa, loss of facial tension, and then start to get a little spacey. Those would be indicators that her anxiety has actually just shot up above what we call her threshold. And something about what I just asked is triggering essentially so much unconscious material that her anxiety pops above threshold. And I'll
Wow.
regulate her anxiety back until I start seeing some more of that like tension in her body and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So
Okay.
that just to go back to your original question, why do these signals matter? One of the ways that it matters is it helps me understand when to hit the brake pedal, when to hit the gas pedal. They're also like the beeps of a metal detector, right? So if we're looking for
Mm.
unconscious feelings and
Mhm.
material that this client doesn't even know is there, but is driving her suffering, then I can't see it either. But what I can see are these signals and indications that something is going on below the surface. I can't know exactly what it is, of course.
Sure.
But I can know, interesting. This subject that we just changed to is eliciting an increase of defense mechanisms or an increase of anxiety signaling. Huh, interesting. Let's dive in there and see if we can get to the root of what's causing this person's suffering. So
that is so cool.
It's so cool.
It's like, I'm just picturing one of those, if you watch like a profiler show and how they'll watch their, you know what I mean? Almost like criminal profiling where you're watching it and they say, well, did you see how they moved this way? And all of a sudden they're like, that's the guy.
Oh my goodness. Yes, and thankfully, as an ISTDP therapist, we are your ally, right? That
Right,
we are
right.
teammate, right? We are here for you, so for example, anytime I see a defense mechanism in a client that I know is contributing to their suffering, I'm going to tell them,
Yeah.
right? So they're going to learn what I see. We're going to see it together so that they can put those defenses aside and face what they normally avoid. I'll give another example. Let's say this client with the professor that she thinks hates her goes to another therapist, and this therapist helps her reframe her thinking, right?
Mhm.
Really common and often very effective tool. And says, well, what if you think of the professor's lack of calling on you in class about the fact that he's overwhelmed, right? What if you change the narrative so it's not about you? Again, that could be great. But what I usually find is that that's a short-lived or barely helpful Band-Aid, because the question is, what is causing the original thought in this client's mind that her professor hates her? What is that? Right? So if I don't get to the actual cause of those thoughts and why they're popping up all over the place for this client, then her reframing tool, she's just going to have to keep doing that and keep doing that and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
So can we actually treat the real cause
I love that.
of why that would be?
Yeah, I love that. So really getting to the root of the problem, which I think so many times we want to skip over because it is painful and often we don't know what it is and it's stuck in there somewhere, but being able to use how people are moving to say, what was that? Where maybe they don't even realize that it's there.
They're using, right? Like, I'll give another example. So let's say this client tells me she wants my help with, she thinks so many people hate her, but she wants to deal with the stress that she has in this law class with this one professor. And so, great, I have a specific example to work with. That is always key, because if we just have generalities, we're going to get these general results. So the more specific we can get, the more specific our outcomes can be, the more powerful they can be. So for example, I might say, so what are these thoughts you're having about your professor, right? Let's get an idea of, in my mind, I'm thinking, how do her defenses work? She might say, well, he never looks at me. He doesn't call on me. And when he did call on me, he moved on really quickly. I think he hates me. And I've been really depressed since I started this class. So I might ask for a first reality testing. So is it really in your best understanding that this professor really doesn't call on you as much as other people? And she says, no, genuinely, like I've looked, I've watched, he really doesn't, I don't get it. So then I'll say, okay, so we have a fact, professor's not calling on her. That's the trigger. My professor is not giving me the attention I want, right? So then I ask her, what feelings do you have towards this professor for not giving you the attention you want? And she might say, well, I feel like he hates me. And I say, so that's your thought that's plaguing you and making you depressed. But what's your feeling towards him? And all of a sudden this client starts to learn, oh, I don't know my feelings. I'm just been like a thought factory rather than like in touch with how I feel. So then we might say, so what feelings are there? And then she sighs, right? Which means great, because I blocked her first defense, which was to use thoughts to get rid of her feelings. And those thoughts are what's making her depressed. So then when I move that defense aside, or when she moves that defense aside, I should say, we get a little rise of anxiety. Great, because it's still not too much anxiety. She's still within her threshold. So then she might say, gosh, I have no idea. Great, would you like to? So these thoughts don't have to come and drown out your feelings and make you depressed. Would you like to really know what's underneath? Well, that's revolutionary for most people because they didn't think there was an underneath. right? And
Yeah.
it's like, what do you mean? So that's so hope building. And then we work. I keep asking, yeah, so what feelings? And maybe her anxiety's rising as I'm approaching those feelings, because those feelings, maybe eventually she says, I think I'm angry with him, but I've never been good with my anger. Great. Right now, yeah. So then we start, okay, yeah. So how do you experience that anger physically in the body? Well, I don't. Exactly. So let's help you get that into the body so your anxiety can come down and feel comfortable with anger in the body, so you don't have to have this factory of thoughts that make you depressed and skew reality for you. And maybe as we explore her anger, we realized, yeah, every time her mother made her angry, her mother couldn't handle it. And so her mother would go away. So she equated anger towards mother with being left.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe this is where it gets even deeper. When she was angry with mother, right? Because anger comes with aggressive urges. Anger comes with force and power. It doesn't mean we'll act on them. Right. And so maybe she imagined biting mom, right? Let's think she's 4 years old.
Right.
Maybe she did bite mom once, but now there's guilt in there too. Right. And so we kind of like follow it back to its origin stories and help the body experience what it normally avoided, but in a safe and regulated body. And it takes all of the gasoline out of the engine that was propelling her thoughts that were making her depressed. So now she doesn't even need to do reframing. She can just sit there in class and feel her anger towards her professor for not calling on her enough. And life gets much easier.
I love that you brought that up, because it's so, I say this all the time, but when I'm coaching with somebody and I'll say, okay, what are you thinking about? What's going on? Why are you so stressed? And they always go like, I'm stressed because look at my calendar. And I'm like, yeah, that for sure, that would be stressful. And when we start saying, I'm like, well, how do you feel? And they'll say bad. I'm like, bad, like what? And they're like, I don't know, it's just bad. But it doesn't just get so knotted up, because I think even, and maybe especially, but for myself, working through my own anxiety back when I was anxious all the time, was realizing that, oh, this isn't just anxiety. This is guilt. This is shame. This is
defense
fear.
mechanisms.
Right. It was like all of these things that are just like this knotted up mess of emotions that I was like, oh, this is a lot. So let's just call it bad.
Yeah, right. And people need help pulling that apart, right? So for example, usually 99% of the time, shame isn't a feeling. It's a defense mechanism, right? For example, let's bring back to this woman in law school, right? Well, I just feel such shame because clearly he thinks I'm stupid, right?
Yeah.
No, that's actually what we call a defensive affect, or an emotion being used as a defense against her rage towards this professor that won't pay attention to her. So we would actually block the shame. We'd actually move it aside. So you're absolutely right. We have all of this confusion around what's an emotion, what's a trigger, what's a defense mechanism, and what's anxiety. Because anxiety is not a feeling either. Anxiety is a symptom of a buried core feeling. So yes, you're absolutely right. Such a mess sometimes that we have to.
It is. It's a big mess. It's just a giant, like what do we call it? Just a nest of just emotions everywhere. Yeah. It's so funny.
Right.
And I feel like we're at this really interesting, I think, positive place in history or culture or life or wherever we are right now. There's so much good energy going into getting mental health help, seeking therapy, we've taken all of the weirdness out of it, or, I can remember, I'm old enough to remember when people say, oh, are you going to a psychiatrist? And people not knowing the difference between a psychiatrist or a therapist or a psychologist. But if you went and took any medicine or you got any help, there was this whole like, oh, she's crazy. And we've just gotten so far past that. But it almost seems, from looking on social media especially, that now we've become our own personal experts. And we are diagnosing ourselves with so many things because we can get on and Google, which is terrible, and say, oh, well, obviously I have this, and this. What is your opinion on this? Because I think that there's like, yay, we're learning about ourselves, but
Hey, I talk with a lot of anxious women, and more often than not, what I hear is how overwhelmed they feel. They know that their schedules are too full, they know their brains are too full, but they have no idea what to do about it or what's causing it. Trying to balance work and home responsibilities, keep everything running smoothly and everybody happy, then to do it perfectly is emotionally, mentally, and physically exhausting. So I created a short 5-question quiz to help you get to the bottom of why you feel so overwhelmed and to give you some solutions to help you feel less stressed and anxious and more confident. Because when you know what you're doing that's causing you to stress, you can swap habits to create more space for yourself to rest and relax. Resting and relaxing makes it easier to think clearly, to work efficiently, and to still have time for yourself to go do the stuff you've been wanting to do. And wouldn't it feel amazing to be confident, to feel calm, and to be able to go have fun again? I mean, I think so. You can take that quiz using the link in the podcast show notes and have a very first step forward out of overwhelm in less than 5 minutes.
Right. I mean, it's a mixed bag, right? Because sometimes we're learning accurate information about ourselves. Yay. But a lot of times we are actually applying something incorrectly to ourselves. And there's no way we can do better because we just don't know. So it's really a mix. And, a label, if we look at like, oh, I found out that I have anxiety or I have generalized anxiety or I have ADHD or whatever it might be, a label helps us get rid of shame. But that's unfortunate because we never should have had shame to begin with. And a label can sometimes then also be used as a defense itself. For example, I hear this all the time. Well, it's my ADHD. Well, it's my anxiety. And so therefore I am unable to do X, Y, or Z. And sometimes that's true, and most often it's not. And so it is also sometimes that label a defense against ownership and responsibility and our own internal power. But it really depends on every single person I've ever seen has done something a little different from the person that came before them. So it is really difficult to relate to social media or Google or whatever, and truly get tailored information, which is why it's so important to go to somebody who's well-trained and understands how to diagnose the difference, say, this is very common, the difference between anxiety and ADHD, right? Because they have a massively overlapping presentation. And so, yeah, it's a real mixed bag because some people find freedom and good freedom and helpful freedom from information they learn. And some people get stuck and they end up going down a rabbit hole that they don't even realize is a rabbit hole.
Yeah. And then I can't help but wonder if they have gone on and they have, with good intention, figured out, oh, I have some characteristics of this or I have some characteristics of this. And they've decided, I think there's so much damage in my own personal experience of saying, I have anxiety, and how much you don't do, how much you just say, oh, I'm not going to do that because it makes me anxious.
Exactly.
And to be able to say, well, what if you weren't anxious? Would you do it? Would you want to do it? Oh, yes, but I can't. And I'm like, oh, you can. We just limit. It feels like there's so many limits out there, and yes, labels, but also, do we all want to have a label? I'm just not sure. I mean, that's just me thinking out loud.
Exactly. Do we need a label to explain our behavior? We really don't, but we do it because we're afraid of judgments of others. So part of it is being able to stand on our own and really say, okay, so for example, I don't have generalized anxiety disorder, but I certainly have anxiety. Right? I don't know a person on this planet who doesn't have some form of anxiety. And so I remember, when I started doing more podcasts and recently radio, it's like my anxiety was barely tolerable. Like it was intense. It was higher than I've experienced it, and I don't even know how long. Mm-hmm. And if I had said, no, this is my anxiety, I can't do this, I wouldn't be here. Right. So I can thankfully say, no, I just needed to be so gentle with myself during that time, but still a nice, gentle push forward so that I can really come in to this power that we all have inside of ourselves. We all have capacities that we have not even tapped into yet. But it's also true that some of us are just too tired because we've been pushing ourselves in not a gentle way. for so long. And so it's a fine line to walk.
It is. It is. It's been very interesting. And I have gone down that rabbit hole. I mean, I've gone down that, is this anxiety? Is this ADHD? Let me find out how many things I match on both. I'm like, oh, look at that. It's both. Yeah.
There's actually in
it's
graduate
so interesting.
School. Yeah. It's in graduate school, we were going over the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And, all of us were paging through this going, oh my God, I have this. Oh my God, I have this. Oh my God. And then my professor was like, that's called medical student disorder, where every single thing you see, you think you have, right? Because if I look up narcissistic personality disorder, I'm going to hit at least one of the criteria, right? And so, like you said, oh my God, then do I have NPD? No. But we do have a little bit of everything. And we're so afraid of realizing the complexities of ourselves too, that we sometimes search for neurodefinitions. So that's why it's so important to talk to someone who can get to know you specifically rather than just finding everything online.
I love that you brought this up because it brought another question to mind. I see so many people talking about, I'm neurodivergent. And I look at them, I'm like, I'm like, but is there actually a neurotypical? Or is it a spectrum? I don't know. I have thoughts, but I don't know because I'm not trained in any of this.
It's a humongous spectrum. So if I have somebody, and I'm not a specialist in autism or anything like that, so I want to make that clear too, but it's a huge spectrum. And again, if I have somebody that comes in to me and they say they're neurodivergent, my whole thing is I just want to know exactly what they are talking about. What did you experience? When does this come up for you? And then through the data that the two of us observe together, how do they relate to what they refer to as kind of being neurodivergent? When does that come up for them in conversation with me? How does that play into the presenting problem for, why they're seeking my help? So I'm going to really try to understand it on an individual level, because people now, like you said, have this label comes up a lot. And it could be very helpful and it could be very detrimental, and it's somewhere all the way in between. So I am more interested in the individual and how they are using it. Does it help, hurt them? If it helps them here, or does it hurt them there? Is it some mix of in between? So that's really the most important thing to me. It reminds me, again, all details are changed for confidentiality. My previous example was made up, but now I'm thinking of someone specific. They had a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. And when they were in therapy with me and they no longer qualified for it. They definitely did when they came in, but they no longer did. And so I had this conversation with them. I said, hey, on your insurance invoice, it's no longer accurate. Are you ready to take it off? And they said, no. This is who I am. I'm so attached to this diagnosis. And so it's like, then that in and of itself becomes something very important. And then we worked with that. And then I think it was maybe a month later, they said, yeah, I'm ready to, and so that's a little bit more of what I'm interested in for each individual person and their identification with a certain label, whether it's accurate or not.
I think you maybe just unintentionally dropped the greatest little bottle of hope on people, that you don't even have to have generalized anxiety disorder forever. It can be gone.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
No, this is not a lifelong,
Yeah.
No.
Thank you. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
It's not like it's something you have brown hair, which we can also change. But yes, but yeah, or your eye color maybe is a better example. But yeah, it's not, it can be temporary, like a broken arm.
Oh, exactly. Right. If you get to the root of what's causing the symptoms that make up a diagnosis, you absolutely can change it, especially something like generalized anxiety disorder or adjustment disorder with anxious components or whatever that might be. Even depression. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I hope everybody heard that, because that's very important, because so many people just feel, I think, trapped by a diagnosis or trapped by how they feel. and they don't know what to do with it. They just are like, well, this is going to be me for the rest of my life. And it's not.
Exactly. Well, I think a very unfortunate thing is that it's very hard to find providers nowadays that know how to get to the root of a problem. So, you do have people that go to therapy, well-meaning therapists that all they want to do is help, but they didn't either learn about or have access to certain types of training that would help them target the source and therefore, have the symptom presentation slowly disintegrate. So, the same thing goes for like borderline personality disorder and things that people think they can, just need to live with forever. Those things certainly take longer on average to treat. But yeah, getting to the source is so important.
That is amazing. That is so much hope. And I really want to be able to bring that to people, just to say, hey, it's going to get better. There are therapists to help you. There are coaches that can help you create different routines and habits. Like, you got so much backup, but you have to ask for help.
So
you have to ask for help. Yeah. You can't sit there and just say, well, I'm putting all of these little, hello, my name is anxious or whatever it is on your shirt. You have to be willing to ask for it. So I know you have a book coming out, and I know that is going to be a great way for people to get some help. So tell us about that. Tell us where we can find it, what it's about.
Sure. The book is called What I Couldn't Tell My Therapist, and you can buy it anywhere you normally buy your books. The ebook is also available, and it will be published on October 8th. So we are coming up fast. But this book was my way of helping people learn that the things that they usually hide from themselves and other people can actually be the key to their transformation. So it is a intertwining story with 3 different patients, one of which is myself. And so you have my story, and then the other 2 people who are called Emma and Walter. I am their therapist. And all 3 of us go through our own journeys of uncovering our defense mechanisms, facing the truth, dealing with our anxiety. So really everything I've described here so far today, you're going to see in so much more live and living color in What I Couldn't Tell My Therapist. So it really helps you dive into the work, and like, you basically join us in our intensive psychotherapy sessions where we're confronting things that we have hidden from ourselves for decades and decades.
That sounds amazing. My daughter's going to school right now to get her MSW, and her birthday is October 4th. So I'm like, oh, she's getting a late birthday gift this year. Yay!
That's wonderful.
Yes. So how do people connect with you? Where can they learn more about you?
Sure. Well, you can find me on my website, which is Michelle M May. So my first name, middle initial, last name, LPC, which stands for Licensed Professional Counselor.com. So that's Michelle M May LPC.com. And then you can also find me on Instagram, which is also Michelle M May LPC. On my Instagram page, it's quite different from what you see with normal mental health practitioners. I'm really teaching people about defense mechanisms and how to recognize them in certain environments. So if you want to learn more about how to recognize these metal detector beeps like we talked about today, definitely head there to find out more.
Perfect. And I will link both of those in the podcast show notes so that people can find you and connect with you. This has been such great information, and it's so hopeful. And just for people to know that there is, you can get to the root. There actually is a root. And now I'm going to be on the lookout for defense mechanisms in myself all day long. And already knowing that I can tell when my defenses go up, I'm going to be like, oh, there's another one.
Yep, just remember to be kind and gentle as you do so.
Yeah, it's there for a reason, right? So Thank you so much for joining me today. This has just been an honor, and
thank you so much.
Much fun.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the More Than Anxiety podcast. Before you go, be sure to subscribe and leave a review so others can easily find this resource as well. And of course, if you're ready to feel calm, to stop overthinking and have a lot more fun, you can go to the show notes, click the link, and talk to me about coaching. I'll talk to you soon.